80 The teachings of the Lord of the Second Coming. 4.2 The 400-year period of regional church leadership. The next period in the age of the Providence of Restoration was the 400-year period of the Judges, when judges led the Israelite tribes. Since the age of the Prolongation of the Providence of Restoration has been the age of substantial parallels, it should contain a 400-year period comparable to the period of the Judges. What is called the period of regional church leadership began when Christianity was declared the state religion of the Roman Empire, and ended with the enthronement of Charlemagne in 800 A.D. In this period, the people were led by regional church leaders, patriarchs, bishops and abbots with multiple roles, corresponding to the judges in Israel. This period was the substantial parallel to the 400-year period of the Judges, and its purpose was to restore that earlier period through parallel indemnity conditions. 4.3 The 120-year period of the Christian Empire. When the people of Israel unified as a nation under the leadership of King Saul, they began the 120-year period of the United Kingdom, which continued through the reigns of King David and King Solomon. The parallel 120-year period of the Christian Empire, also called the Carolingian Empire, began with Charlemagne's enthronement as the emperor in 800 A.D. It ended in 919 A.D., when his royal line ceased in the eastern half of the realm and Henry I was elected king of the German lands. This period was the substantial parallel to the 120-year period of the United Kingdom, and its purpose was to restore that earlier period through parallel indemnity conditions. 4.4 The 400-year period of the divided kingdoms of East and West. Since the temple's holiness was not properly upheld in the period of the United Kingdom, the kingdom was eventually divided into two kingdoms, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. Thus began the 400-year period of the divided kingdoms of north and south. In the age of the Prolongation of the Providence of Restoration, the Carolingian Empire was divided into two kingdoms, the Holy Roman Empire in the east and France in the west. Although when the Carolingian Empire was first divided, it was split into the kingdoms of the East Franks, the West Franks and Italy. Italy soon reverted to the rule of the East Franks, and together these constituted the Holy Roman Empire, while the West Franks consolidated as the Kingdom of France. This 400-year period of the divided kingdoms of East and West began with the division of the Christian Empire in 919 and ended in 1309, when the papacy moved to Avignon, in what is now southern France. This period was the substantial parallel to the 400-year period of the divided kingdoms of North and South, and its purpose was to restore that earlier period through parallel indemnity conditions. 4.5 The 210-year period of papal exile and return. During the period of the divided kingdoms of North and South, the kingdom of Israel in the north perished at the hands of the Assyrians, because its people had fallen into corruption and idolatry. The kingdom of Judah in the south also became faithless and failed to uphold the holiness of the temple. Consequently, its people were taken into exile in Babylon, the Satanic world. Over the next 210 years, they suffered in exile, returned to Israel, rebuilt the temple, and renewed the covenant. The parallel period of papal exile and return also lasted approximately 210 years. It began in 1309 A.D., when, the papacy having become corrupt, Pope Clement V was forced to move the papacy from Rome to Avignon and live there, subject to the kings of France. This period continued even after the papacy returned to Rome, until the Protestant Reformation began in 1517. This period of 210 years was the substantial parallel to the 210-year period of Israel's exile and return, and its purpose was to restore that earlier period through parallel indemnity conditions. 4.6 The 400-year period of preparation for the second advent of the Messiah. After the Jewish people were liberated from their exile in Babylon and returned to Jerusalem, they reformed their religious and political life. Based on the prophecies of Malachi, they began preparations to receive the Messiah. After the 400-year period of preparation for the advent of the Messiah, Jesus came to the Jewish people to restore that period through indemnity. In the age of the Prolongation of the Providence of Restoration, we expect a parallel 400-year period of preparation for the second advent of the Messiah. In fact, it began in 1517, with Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation, and has lasted until the eve of the second advent of Christ on the earth, as the substantial parallel to the 400-year period of preparation for the advent of the Messiah. Its purpose has been to restore that earlier period through parallel indemnity conditions. Chapter 4 The parallels between the two ages in the Providence of Restoration. Since the ultimate purpose of the Providence of Restoration is to lay the foundation for the Messiah if it is prolonged, The dispensations to restore this foundation must be repeated. We know that to establish the foundation for the Messiah, a central figure must make a symbolic offering acceptable to God, by employing an object for the condition and passing through a required time period. In addition, he must lay the foundation of substance, by making an acceptable substantial offering upon, fulfilling the indemnity condition to remove the fallen nature. In the course of the providence, the repetition of dispensations to restore the foundation for the Messiah has meant, in effect, the repetition of dispensations to restore through indemnity, the symbolic offering and the substantial offering. The historical record illuminates the parallels between providential periods, caused by the repetition of dispensations to restore through indemnity, the foundation for the Messiah. The age of the prolongation of the Providence of Restoration has been set up to restore the age of the Providence of Restoration. Through parallel indemnity conditions of a substantial type, let us examine the comparable characteristics of each providential period. From this standpoint, first, however, we need to identify what groups of people have had the central responsibility for God's providence and the historical sources, which can shed light on their history. Human history consists of the histories of countless peoples. Nevertheless, God has specially chosen certain people to walk the model course of restoration to lay the foundation for the Messiah. God puts them at the center of his providence and guides them by his principle. Their history, in turn, steers the course of human history as a whole. A nation or people entrusted with such a mission is called God's chosen people. God's first chosen people consisted of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, who had established the family foundation for the Messiah. Therefore, the nation centrally responsible for God's providence in the age of the Providence of Restoration was Israel. The Old Testament, which records the history of Israel, provides the source material with which to study the history of the providence in that age. However, from the time that they rejected Jesus, the Jewish people lost their qualification to be centrally responsible for God's providence. Foreseeing this, Jesus uttered the parable of the vineyard, saying, "The kingdom of God will be taken away from you, and given to a nation producing the fruits of it." Matt. 2143. Street. Paul said in anguish over his kinsmen, the Jewish people, "For not all who are descended from Israel belong to Israel, and not all are children of Abraham because they are his descendants. It is not the children of the flesh who are the children of God, but the children of the promise are reckoned as descendants." Rom. 96-8. Indeed, the people who became centrally responsible for the providence in the age of the prolongation of the Providence of Restoration were not the Jews, but rather the Christians. They assumed the mission to accomplish God's unfulfilled providence of restoration. Accordingly, the history of Christianity provides the source material for understanding providential history in this age. In this sense, the descendants of Abraham in the Old Testament age may be referred to as the first Israel, and the Christians in the New Testament age may be called the second Israel. 1. When we compare the Old Testament to the New Testament, the 5 books of the Law Genesis to Deuteronomy, the 12 books of history Joshua to Esther, the 5 books of poetry and wisdom Job to the Song of Solomon, and the 17 books of prophecy Isaiah to Malachi in the Old Testament, correspond to the Gospels, Acts, the letters of the Apostles and Revelation, respectively. However, while the books of history in the Old Testament record most of the 2,000-year history of Israel, the book of Acts records only the history of the earliest Christians in the generation after Jesus' death. To find historical records pertaining to God's work of restoration in the New Testament age, with a scope comparable to those found in the Old Testament, we must consult in addition the entire history of Christianity from Jesus' time to the present day. On this basis, we can compare the histories of the first and second Israels and their impact on the character of each period. In the 2 providential ages, recognizing a pattern of parallel periods, we come to know more clearly that history has been shaped by the systematic and lawful providence of the living God.